right, welcome everyone to the 14th Annual Symposium. I'm Dr. Jeanette Schnars. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Science Consortium, and so happy to have you all here to kick off our first session. So just a couple things real quick to go over. The registration table was right when you walked in, so you can get any information or questions that you might have. We'll have staff there the entire time, so please feel free to ask them. We are in room 112 right now. Next door, just down the hall, is room 110. That's kind of our social area, so if you want to sit down and be able to talk with people, please feel free to use 110. And then the next room down is room 108, and that is if you are a presenter and would like to practice your presentation, you're welcome to use that. On our second floor, so the stairs are right outside the door. On our second floor, that is where our poster session will be held. The poster session is tonight from 6 to 8. Some of the posters are already up, so feel free during the breaks to go out and check the posters out. Around the posters are about 20 tables, and those are different exhibitors. So some of our partners, some of our members, other people that we work with or collaborate with have tables up there with information. You can learn more about that stuff. Our cafe is over there, but we do have coffee and tea and water in the back. Please feel free to help yourself. And we ask that if you do go in and out during the session, just close the door behind you and try to be as quiet as possible. We will be live streaming all of this. So Eric Dye right here with Other Theater is in charge of all the live streaming, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel, RegSciTV, after the event is over. So if there was a talk that you really were excited about and wanted to show your friends, go onto our website and you can check it out again, or show it to your class or other people. For the presenters in the room, we do ask that you use the microphone up front because Eric will be taping it. However, he also has a microphone up there. That's not to say stand right up next to the camera and talk in the mic, but try to make sure that you make it so that we can hear you on our YouTube channel as well as we live stream this. I'm standing really close to the microphone, but off to the side, so I'm not in the camera shot. But Eric's a pretty good videographer, so he will get you no matter where you go. All right, so we are going to go ahead and kick off our first session. I'm really excited about this session. It is work that we have been doing for over the last 6 years. We've just received a grant from the same organization, which is originally Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding through Sustain Our Great Lakes in collaboration with Ducks Unlimited. And this whole session is talking about a lot of the work that we have been doing and are going to continue to do for the next 3 years on wetland restoration on Presque State Park. So to kick off our session and our symposium, Ms. Holly Best, who is Park Manager 3 at Presque State Park, has headed up a large portion of this project, and I'm excited to hear her presentation on an epic war.
As Jeanette mentioned, my name is Holly. Some other important things for some of the students in the room. I also oversee the internship program. And through this grant that Jeanette mentioned, we do have grant funding available for college students. So when you get to the college level and you are interested in a paid position, hopefully we will still have them at that time. I'm going to use the microphone.
You can take it off if you want.
I'm not a fan. Is this thing on? Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Now I'm trapped back here, because usually I wander about. Is that better? Not at all? I know. I'm a park manager. So anyhow, so this presentation, the part that I'm going to do is basically an overview of the whole project, why we're doing what we're doing, and then following me will be some other presentations that get into more of the details of what those parts and pieces are. Basically, what we're doing is the park has received grant funding for many years now to go over and take care of these invasive plants. It is an epic battle. If you know anything about the management and the balance between native plants and invasive plants, it is always a battle. There's always a war going on. So we take any victory we can and we run with it. But in this grant specifically, we have many partners, several of whom, as I mentioned, will be presenting later. So why is it important to do it here? Why is it important to take this battle at Presque State Park? Well, for many reasons, Presque State Park is very important. It's the only lake shore in Pennsylvania. It's a recurving sand spit. If you're not sure what that means, basically it's a piece of sand that's jutting out into the lake. It lays between the Lake Erie and Presque Bay. And if we hadn't engineered the heck out of it way back in the 1800s, it would have actually broken off many, many times and be just kind of scooping its way, swinging its way down the shoreline, and it probably would not be existing the way it is now. So we interjected the hand of man, and we're keeping it here, so therefore we have to maintain it the way it is. One of those big battles we have here are the plants that are ending up on the shoreline. They get here for all different ways. You know, we're surrounded by water, so the water's bringing in the seeds, wind and wave action, birds, all sorts of seed dispersal methods. So we're constantly under attack. This park is also very important because it has all of the successional stages present. So we go from the brand new beachfront all the way to the climax forest. So that means that any of those plants, we have native plants within all those ecosystems, but we also have invasive invaders coming into all those ecosystems as well. We're on some pretty heavily used migration paths for birds. We see over 300 species of bird here on the park. There's different numbers, 320, 340, 370, we've seen them all, but they're pretty much always coming through. It's very important that we provide the habitat for them to use for nesting, resting, coverage and feeding and all those kinds of things. We also are home to many, many species of special concern. Since we're the only sand spit in Pennsylvania, pretty much most of the plants that occur in that sandy environment are rare, threatened, or endangered within Pennsylvania, if not federally, because they just don't happen other places. In addition to that, we also have some amphibians and reptiles, we have birds, and we have some fish species that are also rare and threatened. So we want to make sure that we're providing the best ecosystem for those to thrive. The park is also acknowledged as an important bird area. We have a federally designated critical habitat for piping plovers and other shorebirds. If you know anything about the success story, we have been successfully fledging piping plovers from Gulf Point for the past 2 years. That is the first time that's happened in over 50 years. So all of this resource management work is kind of coming together to improve those habitats for those species. We are also designated as a national area, and we also see 4 million visitors a year. So we are the most visited state park in Pennsylvania. We are more visited than many, many national parks. So just striking the balance between maintaining the resource for the plants and animals, as well as maintaining a resource that people want to come and recreate at, is also a big, huge challenge. So just to touch a little bit about some of our special species. The first bird species up there is the osprey. We did have osprey nesting on the park this year. The park had a hacking tower over on Thompson Bay, and it's basically just a platform that's built up into the sky. And actually, when we talked about redoing our resource management plan a few years back, we were actually questioning why we had this hacking tower, because it was put in and nothing had ever used it. So we had concerns about, should we take it down, what should we do? Well, the osprey came back and now they're using it. They have a nest on the hacking tower. They also have a nest on a radio tower that's over by maintenance. That's just for our communication radios. So that's the first time that they've been nesting in the park, to our knowledge, actually nesting on the park. We also have some plant species, including hairy cocoon and purple loosestrife. No. Loosestrife's bad, lupine's good. So the cocoon and the lupine are in an area that's across from the lighthouse. If you drive down the road, you'll see some area fenced off. That area is maintained for those plants. They are extremely rare and threatened, once again, because they're growing on that sand barren type of structure that does not exist other places in Pennsylvania. So the crew is very active in maintaining that ecosystem for them. We also have some other bird species. I mentioned the piping plover already. Those are actually our plover from the park. So that's a cool little picture of them hanging out. We do have least bittern and common tern. Those birds have been on the park in some capacity, but the least bittern, the population of that has probably quadrupled through the resource management work. That's a really great thing to hear. They're marsh birds, they're very active in the marshes, and now pretty much anywhere you go you will see one when they're here nesting. Common terns are trying really, really hard to reestablish a colony out at Gull Point. They are out there, but in very small numbers, so they haven't been able to successfully establish a colony where they actually get young and fledge young, but we're still hoping that that will happen. And then just not to forget any of the other critters, we also have blanding turtle, which are very endangered, and we have a couple of those, just a couple, that are located in Niagara Pond, and that's a pond that we've been actively restoring and trying to get back to native vegetation. So some of the main targets that we're dealing with, the row on top is basically like a terrestrial type target, and then the row below is more aquatically focused. So garlic mustard is a plant that comes in the springtime. The main removal of that is to pull it out of the ground, getting all the roots before the seeds ripen. And the bad news is if you're a little too late and you pull the plant out, they just go spring and spread all over the place. So you want to make sure you get those as early as possible. We do have a lot of honeysuckle. It's the most of the understory of the park, unfortunately. The good and the bad with honeysuckle is it's a very good habitat plant. It's a good cover plant for a lot of bird species. It's a really good hiding spot. It also provides cover for any of our mammals that are on the park, deer, coyote, because they can easily hide behind it and you never even know they're there. So it's kind of a balancing act how we treat the honeysuckle. We don't actively treat honeysuckle in very visible areas, but it's a plant that if we're treating something else and it's in the vicinity and it's not something that will look really terrible if we kill it, we will spray that plant at that time. We also have a lot of Oriental bittersweet. That is being targeted by a group called the Weed Warriors. They're a volunteer corps of individuals, and it's their job to find those vines that are growing up pretty much the whole median from the head of the park to beach 6. They are cutting those vines, cutting a window down at their ankles and right at their head, and then the interns follow them up and spray the roots as they're coming back up. We also have a lot of Japanese knotweed. Luckily, it's pretty isolated, and we have that pretty much managed on how we're cutting that back and spraying it to treat it. The aquatic species are pretty much our largest challenge, and those are the ones that we really focus on within this grant. The two biggest issues we have here are narrow-leaved cattail and Phragmites. If you drive anywhere in Pennsylvania, you will see these two species on any roadway, specifically Phragmites, but definitely also narrow-leaved cattail. So basically those are treated with herbicide spray, and then hopefully after 2 or 3 years they will just die a slow death and like fade off into history. And then we get the next layer. That's purple loosestrife, as I erroneously mentioned earlier. That is our invasive plant. This year, we saw more purple loosestrife than we've seen in many, many years. I think mostly because the high lake levels really germinated a lot of seeds that had just been sitting there. This happens everywhere, but specifically in a sandy environment. Seeds just kind of sit in that environment, and they can sit there for 100 years. And then if conditions are right, they can just sprout. Those plants can just sprout again. So it's really, really good if it's a native plant that you want to have come back. Not so great if it's an invasive plant just sitting there waiting to spring up and say, haha, gotcha, now you got to come find me. Another plant that did that this year was the flowering rush. I personally am sad that this plant is invasive because it's really, really cute. It has a cute little pink flower. In past years, we would maybe find 8 or 10 or 12 of these plants in specific areas on the park. This year, everywhere we went in a wetland area, there was flowering rush that we had to treat. So it was all over the place. Last one on the list there is Ailanthus. That's pretty much also I kind of added it at the end, but it's a terrestrial, more of a terrestrial species. It's also known as tree of heaven. That tree species, we don't see very much of it on the park, and the interns really hit it hard this year. We did have some pop up again, probably like 20 tops, like 20 plants that they treated. The problem with Ailanthus is that it is a host plant to an invasive insect called the spotted lanternfly, which is moving this way from eastern Pennsylvania. Specifically, it's really hitting eastern Pennsylvania very hard. So we're trying to make sure that we are getting ahead of that and making sure that we don't provide the host plant for those insects for them to be here. So how do we do this? What do we do? So the main concept of the park is protecting the best, preserving those special habitats. We talked about the cocoon and lupine area. We also have prickly pear. We have a little bit of native Phragmites, which does exist in very small quantities on the park. And we also have some native cattail, along with other species of special concern and plants, a lot of sedges, rushes, things like that. So what we want to do is we always want to identify those specific areas, those special areas, and then push invasives back from them. We want to clear out the areas so that they can spread out. We want to tip the scales and make the natives really take control of that area. The other thing we'll do is we'll go into a really heavily invaded area. This is like if you've taken a kayak back in the lagoon area. You see a ton of invasive plants. What we're doing there is we're just pushing back the edge, pushing back the leading edge of all of this invasion. So you can kind of see that we're peeling back the layers. It looks like an onion. If you went out there now, you'd be able to see there's a lower layer in the front that's probably we sprayed a couple years ago, and it's almost down into the water at this point. There's a layer behind it that's a little bit less white. It's more yellowish, and that is probably about, we were just out the other night, so I saw this myself. It's probably about 3 or 4 feet tall. And then you see what we treated this year, which is yellowing, and then you can see right behind it all the green stuff that we didn't get to yet. So we're just kind of peeling back those layers, and once those front layers kind of die back, then we can reach the layers beyond. So how do we do it? What are our techniques? So the biggest techniques that we use here, we do use a lot of herbicide, just because we are at the tipping point where that is necessary for us to control these plants. So the methods of applying the herbicide, you see down at the bottom, folks with backpack sprayers, that's the intern crew out there. So they'll use those in areas where they're kind of spot treating. There's some bad plants mixed in with good plants. So they want to make sure that they're just getting those targets. And then we also, you'll see some blue mist area in a couple of those shots, and these guys here. We'll take and use 50 or 100-gallon spray tanks and actually have a high-pressure hose. We use those in areas where we're just inundated with invasive plants, and you see a lot of cattail and you see a lot of Phragmites in those pictures. So basically, where we're not going to harm anything else, there's a monoculture of those bad plants. We're going to hit it hard with that spray and use that high-pressure hose. We've also had a helicopter come in 2012, and in the grant we're working on coming up, in the upcoming treatment season, we'll have a helicopter come back again. That's very helpful going into areas that are inaccessible either by foot or by boat. So we'll have that happen. Some other ways that we'll use the chemical in more sensitive areas or on different species is that if we're treating any woody vegetation, like we have some European birch, European alder, things like that, we'll do something called a hack and squirt. So we cut into the trunk of the tree, spray it with an oily chemical mix, it sinks into the tree, and then we kill the tree that way. It's systemic, it goes into the tree. And then we'll also use at areas where we've really brought the area back to more of a native vegetation type, specifically like Leo's Landing, we will go ahead and use a method called glove of death. So all of our treatment techniques have really cool names. So glove of death is basically where your nitrile gloves, latex gloves, and you cover it up with a cotton glove, spray your cotton glove with the herbicide, and then treat the stem of that plant to make sure that it's fully covered. You want to do that in areas where all the other plants around it are pretty good. You don't want to have any overspray, you want those good plants to take over. We do get permits for all of the herbicide that we use, and everybody has to sign off on those permits. Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania looks at them, Pennsylvania Game Commission as well as Fish and Boat Commission. And anything we're applying on the park is actually, it carries an aquatic label. So it is all glyphosate based, and you hear a lot about glyphosate in the news. These chemical formulations are formulated for use in aquatic environments. They are deemed the most safe. There's nothing that is safe when you're using chemicals. It's killing something, therefore it has properties that will kill things. But these are deemed to cause the least amount of impact on the surrounding environment. So some other folks that you're going to hear from today, we couldn't do any of this work without all of our partners and all of the funding that we receive for these grants. So as Jeanette mentioned, we do get funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. That comes to us in many different forms and through many different smaller pots of money, but that is the overall funding source. Ducks Unlimited, as Jeanette mentioned, is a main partner. As a state agency, it's very hard for us to accept grant money and be able to use it effectively. So Ducks Unlimited serves as the grant administrator. They actually apply for the funds, get the funds, and then kind of dole them out to us so we can use them effectively. The Regional Science Consortium and California University of Pennsylvania, who you'll be hearing from, they've done a lot of the monitoring with plants, amphibians, reptiles, and water quality parameters. So they're working at all of those things to make sure that what we're doing with the herbicide is not causing any problems with the habitat, and to make sure that we're actually making things better. Also Go Native Erie will be talking a little bit about propagation efforts. So as I mentioned, some of the seeds will come out of the seed bank, and those are natives, and that's great. But as a stopgap, to make sure that the invasives are not continuing to proliferate areas, Go Native Erie is actually propagating native plants and putting them in those areas to make sure that the natives are strongly coming back in those areas. We also have the Erie Bird Observatory. They're monitoring bird populations and doing a lot of work for us on that. Specifically with the least bitterns. So it's a good problem and a bad problem. Since we did so much good work with the wetland areas, a lot of those least bitterns have decided to nest in those areas. The good thing is they're there, that's awesome. The bad thing is the Game Commission, who we work with, and they're responsible for birds in Pennsylvania, have said, now you can't treat in those areas. Well, they're there because you've made such a good area that now you have all these threatened species, so now you have to work around them. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, but the Erie Bird Observatory has been awesome having a monitor come out. He actually gets a phone call, we tell him where we're going to go within the next 48 hours. He goes out in the morning, calls for birds. If he hears birds back, he identifies them on a map. Then we can treat in areas that are outside, exclusive of those bird sightings or hearings. Or we sometimes have to say, okay, there's too many birds here. We're going to table this one. We can go in there after August 1st, which is our deadline on that. And then I also mentioned the Weed Warriors previously. Those are headed up by Environment Erie. They're coordinating those efforts. And basically, all of these skill sets have come together for us to be able to do this job. And this is why we get the grant funding, because we have all of these different facets of this program going at all times. Just to show you a little bit about where we're working on the park, basically it's most everywhere. These are just some basic shape files that show where we're doing the work, but there's other areas in addition to this, but you can see that basically we're in the lagoon areas, we're around most of the edges of waterways, we're anywhere where those plants are in existence. With that, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Treatment on some of the woody species you mentioned, like the European birds and stuff. What are you doing with the remaining woody debris after it's treated? Like after it dies, are you leaving it or are you taking it down?
Right. So it depends where it is, and that just kind of goes with like state parks have a hazardous tree protocol. So most of our treatment areas are pretty far out and about, and we're just going to leave them there. They'll fall. They'll be dead snags for habitat for other animals. If anything is near a roadway that we're treating, then once it is, into a state of decay where we're thinking it's going to fall down, then we would remove that. But most of our treatment areas are pretty far out. Roads.
What's your most challenging aspect of trying to manage? Is it like more like is it trying to get politicians or residents behind thinking that
So since Rose was a previous intern, definitely interns are the biggest challenge. I really think just securing the funding is the biggest thing, because there's always a gap in time where you send in an application and then you have to wait 6 or 8 months, and you don't know if you're ready to start that next project again. So there's a lot of like nervous anticipation, waiting to see, and then once you get the funding, it's go time, and you have to just do stuff very quickly. So I think just not knowing about the funding all the time.
Our next presentation is Dr. Bob Whyte. He's from California University of Pennsylvania, and he's going to talk about a comprehensive survey of wetland vegetation.
Was I introduced? Good morning, everybody. I was told I have to use my mic. If I hold it down here, will that be okay?
No.
No, it's not. Can everybody hear me okay? Let's just look into the camera.
Yes.
Well, good morning. Good morning, and I really appreciate Holly's talk. I think that's going to set up the rest of the talks this morning. Really good background information, and we can get into some of the specifics now in terms of what we were actually doing. And Holly had mentioned the monitoring. And so what I'm going to talk about this morning is the vegetation monitoring that we've been doing, but specifically in the wetlands. So really didn't get up too much into the uplands, although a number of the species that Holly mentioned do creep down right to the edge of the wetlands. So the Lanicerus species, that's the honeysuckle, and some others are right down there on the wetland as well. So they do alter wetland habitats as well. For the sake of full disclosure, I'm going to keep this talk somewhat general. As I started going through all of the information I had, and you can see I've got from 2012 to 2018, so we're just wrapping up what I'll call phase 2. And I think, as Holly mentioned, we're getting ready to start phase 3, which will start next year for the next 3 years. And so as I started going through all this information, I realized I've got way too much here, particularly when you start putting together a presentation only a week before that you're supposed to give it. And so I thought the best way to do this was just kind of paint a broad brush. And so hopefully I'll give you a sense of how things have changed, what was here, and what's going on, and then maybe what the next steps are. And then you can kind of fill in the detail by asking lots of questions, and we'll try and give you a pretty good sense of what's going on. Do we have a clicker?
Yes, there is.
Great, thank you.
All right, so
what I really like is, I don't know if these signs are still up, but I love having these educational signs around so people know exactly what's going on. And I'm always curious as visitors drive through the park, all 4 million, if they really understand, and Holly probably can answer this, if they really understand how the park has changed, how the native vegetation is coming back. I don't interact with too many of those people, so I don't really know. Again, Holly already gave the background, so I just put this slide up here from a broader perspective. We want to restore these coastal wetlands. Holly mentioned about the control and the removal, and then in a little while, Jen Salem's going to talk about the propagation, bringing that back in, as well as an element of trying to restore these native plant communities. I specifically want to talk about the monitoring the wetlands, looking at the invasive plants, looking at the native population, native communities, what's going on in the park right now. The way I look at it, this is my perspective on how monitoring fits in. And the way I view it, I like to whine a lot, at least that's what I'm told. And monitoring is what I'll call the poor stepchild of most projects. So you have to do it, but they don't want to give you much in the way of resources to do it. So you have to do the best you can and try and get it's very important information. So as you start to set up your project here, and I'm not going to go through all this, where does monitoring fit in? It fits in up front because you have to do pre-monitoring. You have to know what those existing conditions are. Otherwise, you have no foundation from which to move forward. And then as you get into your project, you continue to monitor. You're going to have pre, you're going to have ongoing, you're going to have post-monitoring, and then it pretty much the cycle goes through. Monitoring is a critical element. Even if you can only do a little, whatever you can do, we have to do, because it's going to provide that information for the future, as we see right here. So these are 3 things which I view as critical from the monitoring standpoint as we move forward. Sustainable management post-removal. That is, as we end each phase, we end the removal and the control of these invasives, and it never ends, by the way. It's Holly's nightmare, it just never ends. I'm not really sustainable management.
When we're done,
we have to ensure that it's not going to come back. So you can't just stop. So prevention. Once all these activities are done. The monitoring provides a measurement of success. You have that pre-monitoring, the ongoing monitoring, and post. But did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we remove? Did we control the invasive species? And then it gives us a lot of good information as a guide for the future. And so monitoring is critical. And so whenever you talk to anyone from funding, tell them more money for monitoring. We need more money. More money.
Right. So what's the problem?
And I think Coffee gave a pretty good overview of the problems. I like this picture. I can't remember where I took this picture. I think it was in the lagoon, in the inner lagoon system. You can see right here what the problem is. So in the back, you've got a nice, I don't want to say healthy because it looks like it's on its way out.
A lot of fragmites.
Here's our Fragmites australis, but right in front of it, we have nice, healthy native plant populations, a native plant community. And this is what we want. And so, as Holly said, moving around the edges, we have to start peeling back those layers, but this is what we want to remove. What's the problem with the invasives? It's poor habitat. In terms of the ecosystem, you change dynamics, you change all the interactions with respect to the organisms, and you reduce the overall integrity of the habitat. So that's the problem. We need to remove this. We need to allow these native communities to restore themselves. And so by monitoring, we can start to see progress based on all of the herbicide and removal applications that are taking place.
So what have we been doing?
Since 2000?
And I put up a little chart here
in terms of how we set this up. And you'll notice we have a number of sites. And I'll show you a map here in a second. How did we choose our sites?
Limited resources, limited time, we needed easy access.
In other words, I needed to get into these sites. There's a lot of sites I would love to monitor, but it's too difficult to get into out of on an ongoing basis. So we sat down with Holly, the DCR, we tried to figure out what might be some good sites to monitor that at least give us a gauge on what's going on.
And I'll show you
all these Leo's Landings, Thompson's Bay, Long Pond, meaning the inner lagoon system, Marina Lakes, and more recently the Coast Guard Station. We started out by establishing a number of transects at all these sites. This was really good quantitative data.
But
once we got into 2017, something happened here at the park called Lake Erie. And I'll come back to that.
Most of these sites
have made it almost impossible,
not everywhere,
but in general, really made it difficult to get in and do the kind of transect and plot work that we wanted to do. So instead, for these 2 years, we did comprehensive, fairly intensive visual surveys, just documenting everything that we could see. We didn't get around, but running transects was really difficult. We had the Coast Guard Station here as well. We were on Marina Lake from the list. And I'll talk a little bit about these sites when we get to the end here, moving forward, what we would like to do. This at least gives you a sense of where we're at. Also, I'm not going to talk about this, but I want to mention it right now. So 2015, we went around the park, and I'll show you the different sites. We looked at the Fragmites plant tissue. Why are we looking at plant tissue DNA? We wanted to do a DNA analysis. We wanted to know the Fragmites, a single mega population. We have same population of Fragmites, at least from a genetic standpoint.
And then we also
collected the seed heads. And we did some germination studies.
And again, I'm not going to
get into all that, but why would we want to look at the seed head? We wanted to know are Fragmites going to germinate. So I'm going to show you some slides, but if you remove the Phragmites, it's primarily expanding and invading through its rhizomes.
If it starts germinating
from seeds, it's a new ball. It's not something that I don't think the park is prepared to handle it from that standpoint. Now you have thousands, millions of seeds out there. If they're germinating, it makes the control of Phragmites a lot more difficult. So I'll talk a little bit more about not about this per se, but about Phragmites, spreading it and controlling it.
By the way, we
found very poor germination rates. But again, that's something where the studies around the country had mixed results. So here you can kind of at least see what we've been doing. Here's a map showing you everywhere we've been. So from 2012 to present, we've tried to spread it out throughout the park. 2016, here we said we had the Coast Guard station. Here at the Thompson's Bay, we were on Thompson's Bay, but we also added a second site. So right along the road, there used to be a huge stand of Phragmites. It's been cleared out, so we started monitoring that site as well. That's a fairly large complex. And the red sites are the leaf tissue seed head samples. And again, we spread them out. Oh, by the way, the DNA results told us that all of the frag was the same. So it all originated from the same population. Genetically, it was identical. Again, that's about the last thing I'm going to say, at least for right now. So these are our sites. And again, you can see Leo's Landing, right down here. We then went up here to Marina Lake, and we primarily sampled off the back shores here. I'll show you that a little bit more later. We went into the lagoon system, and we sampled at about 5 or 6 spots here in the lagoon, and then we went over to Thompson's, and then more recently we're over at the Coast Guard station as well to see what's out there.
So what I want to do now
is kind of quickly go through these different sites, and I'll give you a little bit of quantitative data, but kind of just in general show you what's out there. So here's Leo's Landing. So we're at the entrance to the park more or less. This is a photo, it's hard to see, from 2012. It looks nice and green, but I'm going to show you some other pictures.
What was out there,
and what it looks like now. So today we have a fairly nice, diverse, mixed emerging community. I'm going to quantify that for you here in a second. Historically, at least in 2012, we have all 3 species of typhus. The native broadleaf latifolia, the narrowleaf angustifolia, and plenty of the hybrid Untitled out there as well.
First started
the monitoring and looking at this in 2011. We had some native. The native quickly disappeared. The initial herbicide applications got rid of a lot of the typhus Phragmites, but then the angustifolia started coming back. And the angustifolia narrowleaf took over fairly healthy fairly extensive parts, along with some glauca. But that's under control as well now. We just recently started seeing some of the native cattails come back to Leo's Landing as well. You can't see it here, but I'll show you another picture. You have some deep water here because this is connected right to the bay. And so we have the deep water channel here, and you have quite a bit of floating leaf plants as well as a healthy submerging community out there as well. Today, right now, the Phragmites is minimal. Scattered pockets of Phragmites out there, and again, I'm going to address that a little bit as well. But it's been controlled fairly well. And in fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to jump ahead to the next slide for a second. And I don't know how well you can see this, but this is a photo from 2011. And if you look up here, this is all Phragmites. Notice water levels are down. There's no standing water out here, but this is almost 100% Phragmites. In 2014, it's been controlled. You see very little Phragmites, and this is where all the cattail typhus is starting to come in. A lot of narrowleaf cattail. You jump forward to 2017, water levels are up. You can't see it all here, but you have a healthy emerging community. This is called pickerelweed here, but you do have emergent plants all around the edges as well. So again, the native cattail is coming back, the Phragmites is minimal. Now I'm going to talk about this. I'll look at this here in a second. Let me jump back to this slide for a second. So here you can see the center of Leo's Landing, and you can see your floating leaf community, your whitewater lilies, your yellow water, all around it. You can see all your cattail. You have a number of other species, your Spargania. You have your other emergent species that are out there. Your pickerelweeds, your common native emergent species are all coming back and are out there. But it's fairly deep through here as well. but it's becoming a nice and healthy
Here you
community.
can see on the
Here you can see on the edges, this is all
narrowleaf
narrowleaf cattail.
And a lot of it is
pushed back now.
It's hard to see it.
It's hard to see it, but if you would be able to look, you could clearly see that this is narrowleaf cattail that's coming in. But a lot of it is being sprayed, as you can see, and it is starting to die back.
I wanted to give you
So I
a
wanted to give you a
measure,
just a general sense of what does it look like. So what I'm using here are important
and I
calculated this from the transects that we initially ran. And important values are just a general way for us to gauge what's dominant out here, what's going on in these communities. And so we take the density, we take cover, what I'll call abundance, and then we take frequency of occurrence. How often is this plant showing up in our plots? And using a combination of the three, we can list the dominant species out here and what's going on. So I'm showing you 2012 versus 2014. Because this is the early stages of the control, and you can start to see everything change. So in 2011, 2012, we had quite a bit of Phragmites. It was mixed with the type, largely type of Industrialia, narrowleaf invasive, type of block, which is the hybrid invasive as well, non-native. So they were fairly abundant. But you also have, you can see here in 2012, you know, the species that is starting to change. The river bulrush is starting to come back. Your soft stem bulrush, these are all nice, healthy natives that are starting to come back. But notice you see no Phragmites that came into our plots in 2014, which is really good. And so if I had run transects more recently, you would see mostly all native plants in here, emergent plants in here, and the type number probably would have dropped maybe down to 20. So it is shifting, it is changing. We are losing some of the invasives that are out there.
Let me switch. We go from
Leah's Landing down here to Thompson's Bay up here. I've got these two pictures here to show you. This was in 2012. And this whole range of shoreline here was nothing but a wall of Phragmites. All the frag here. So that year they initially treated the south reach of shoreline here, and you treated frag. You can see the wall of frag. I'll show you another picture of this as well. This is a different environment. So now you have what I'll call maybe a little bit more dynamic. This is directly connected to the bay as well, but this is an open water area. This is more of a customary type environment. And you have a wall of trees and shrubs with vegetation back here, and so it kind of prevents the wetland from moving back in. But behind it, we do have an extensive wetland complex, and as water levels come up, as the Phragmites was removed, I'm going to show you what that looks like as well, because that's changed extensively also. Here's that same reach. This is before they controlled it. Here's one of my students. I had her standing in front of this. You can see how all the Phragmites. And this came out about 20 meters. Just to show you, over 60 feet. This was fairly extensive. But again, you can see the shoreline. And this is mostly some native vegetation coming back, but it's fairly poor in diversity. Not a very healthy environment, and there's some reasons for that, which I'll get to. But you can also see all the woody vegetation here as well. Putting a roadblock to what goes on. So as long as the levels go down, the wetland can advance this way, and you can get a return of some healthy species. Here's a great way to quantify. So this is what we're going to call heuristic quality assessment index. Every species is assigned what we call CFC value, coefficient of conservatism. And that value is based on is the plant a generalist, you get a very low number, or is the plant more a specialist, it's a very high number. Invasives get a 0. And then you only count the native species. So a combination of counting the native species, summing up the CFC values, and we can assign a score to these wetlands. Again, it's all subjective. You have to make apples to apples. So we want to make sure we compare wetland types to wetland types, but it's great for looking at Leo's land. Notice here from 2012, we have very low values, very poor score. So we're getting to the point now where this is not a bad score. The diversity is coming back. I think we counted almost 60 different species, wetland species out there this past year. I think this was in the low 53, 54. I can't remember.
But notice that the score
is coming up. I broke up Thompson's Bay into a north reach and a south reach, and the reason being is because along the north reach you have some embayments. The shoreline is a little different, it's a little more complex, diverse, and you have a much greater diversity, and notice again how it's coming up, whereas the south reach, notice it went down. It went down because lake levels are up, and there was nowhere for the wetland to go, and we actually lost species. So it actually went down. But overall, you can see a general trend of things increasing. This is the Thompson's Bay, the roadside. I wish I had a picture to show you. This is a wall of phragmite, and now it's coming back really nice. Here's some type of Blackfolia, the native. It's fairly deep out there as well, and that's right back. We're going to try and run transects out there next year. And I ran an FQAI score, the quality assessment, and notice it's fairly high as well. We did the same thing in the lagoon, long time, Marina Lake, again, all the same type of work. You can see the cattail in the front, the phragmites in the back. And I'm going to wrap up here. 1 minute left. Two things that I really want to mention. Lake level. We need to consider lake levels. Lake levels are up. What does that mean? It means don't be fooled by the fact that you can ignore what I'm saying. Don't be fooled by the fact that you've been very successful in controlling phragmites. In part, it's gone because they've done an excellent job. In part, it's gone because lake levels are up. Therefore, we've got these small pockets of frag that are just waiting to explode as soon as lake levels go down. So that's Holland's and Crew's task is to start getting. But you can see they're going back up. You can see they had gone down. And here's blue here, they're really high this past year. And so the control efforts on the high lake levels, you kind of put that frag in check. Here's some isolated patches, and I know Holly and DCR know that they're there. Look at this dry ground. So here's frag floating on the water surface. As soon as lake levels come down, look at this. You've got a network of all these rhizomes. And at every node, you've got these. It's just going to explode as soon as you give it that opportunity. Lake levels drop, and you can see it starts to germinate. And so you've got to be aware of this. You've got to get out and start getting. Last thing I'll say. I went to the talk in Cincinnati on the Ohio River, and they were talking about blue-green algae. It's actually blue-green algae. And they started talking about the connection between healthy native plant community, emergence, submergence, and the control of blue-green algae. Hadn't really thought about that much. So something to think about, something that we can talk about a little bit later. But if we restore the native communities, maybe it will help us in some sense controlling the blue-green algae as well. Next steps, we've got to continue with data, final report, and we're entering phase 3. Thank you to everyone. A number of you in the room here helped me on a lot of this. So I just want to thank everybody. And I apologize because I know I went too long.
Time for one quick question as I switch it over. Anybody has a question?
One quick question.
Yes.
What would you say, these wetland plants, you have some names
Right.
up there for service and stuff. In a really nice, healthy, how many different species should there be in these areas?
So the question is, what should your species number look like? So at Leo's Landing, when we went out and did the survey this year, they said we did almost 60 species. That's phenomenal. But you got to be careful as well, because as it transitions back, you're going to get a lot of species move in and get a high species number. I think as it stabilizes and it finds a balance, the species number might come down a little, but that's okay. So if I can find 30, 40, 50 species, that's wonderful. Okay. Good question.
For those of you that are students in the group, keep in mind as you're listening, like Holly mentioned, she hires interns in the summer, and we pay our interns pretty well. It's more than minimum wage. And also, you can see opportunities at different colleges. So if you're interested in this type of work, please talk to Dr. Whyte during the break and maybe a little bit more about CalU.
All right, the other
thing I wanted to mention is that with our next phase, we are going to document all of this work that we're doing in a documentary that Eric Dye will be filming, editing, producing, and it'll be fantastic. And probably in about 2.5 years be shown on our theater. So that's, the recognition that we're getting for this project and that we've done over the long term. All right, so I want to keep this moving. We want to introduce Jen Salem. She is currently with the Erie School District and the Regional Science Consortium. She's very busy, and she has her own organization, Go Native Erie. She has been with the Regional Science Consortium for several years and has been working on this project as well. So she's going to talk about the four seasons of growing and the plant propagation portion.
Hello, good morning everyone. Just wanted to start with some disclaimers between my presentation and Dr. Whyte's. He has been working on this project longer than I have. I really came in 2016. So my information runs from, I call this phase 1, he calls this phase 2. We'll be going through, what I've done is isolated, in very general terms, our problem, which Holly and Bob have already discussed. I've come up with solutions. I am a plant grower. I propagate plants for a living. So this is just my very narrow perspective on this part of the project. But I wanted to take you through some of the solutions that I've come up with to kind of guide me through the process, and then also take you through all 4 seasons, just so you can see what kind of work is done. Because I think it's a common misnomer that people that grow plants for a living are just busy in the nice weather. Some of my busiest times are actually in the fall and winter. So we'll kind of go through and talk about our issues that we've had with this. And this is very simple terms. Holly mentioned before, we're inundated with invasive species on Presque State Park, and part of our solution was to speed up the natural process, if you will, to start growing things on the park that we were putting right back on the park, and choosing the sites is kind of our first solution. The sites that Dr. Whyte had mentioned and my sites do correspond, except for the neck of the peninsula, which we'll talk about, and that was a more recent addition. And I'll explain. It was difficult to choose sites because we needed something that was in recovery mode. We couldn't go into areas like Holly and Bob both had really good photos of areas with very large stands of Phragmites and narrowleaf cattail. We couldn't grow plants and plant our plants right next to things that were going to be sprayed out. We had to be very selective as to the locations that we were choosing, and there's multiple criteria that went into choosing this site, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of overview. This is the first site that I began my work in, Thompson Circle, and Bob had some excellent photos of it pre-treatment. Holly's interns have done an excellent job removing the invasive species, and you can see this photo was probably taken 2015-16 perhaps, and you can see the stand of dead Phragmites in the background. Middle of the photo, let's see if I can get our pointer. Oops, no. Middle, here we go. There's a little bit of frag right here, but we also have a lot of empty space, and that is exactly what I want to see, so I can get in there and start putting my plants in. Of course, things would naturally come up in the seed bank, but it's kind of a gamble. We don't know if it would be invasives or natives, so things that would be harmful to that restored area or beneficial. Second site is Leo's Landing. This is a picture taken from this year when I was standing on the feather. If you're familiar with the observation tower, there's a wooden walkway and platform you can overlook this wetland. This is the area, I think Bob and I would agree, this had the most diversity, at least I kind of felt like when we were doing surveys. And you can take a look here, and I really am not seeing a lot of, there are little pockets of invasives, but something that we could do glove of death on, or like spot treat, and our problem child, the peninsula neck. This is an area that is, as soon as you get onto the park, it is the bay side, has extremely high water levels in this area. It's inundated with European black alder, which is an invasive tree species, and I threw this photo in because the reason that this is a challenge, someone had asked about trees. These trees are dead. When they die, they drop all their branches into the water, and so trying to pick your way through this is very challenging. This is where I fall all the time, and I'm very hesitant to take volunteers into this section until we have very fluctuating water levels. So there have been times when I had a lot of land to work in, and then there were times when I was completely kept out of this area. And I actually have a photo of the hack and sport method. They basically girdle the trees, and this is a good right here. Here you can see bark was cut away. Here there's even a little bit of a bluish tint there. They spray chemical on those. So from the girdle up, it is a dead tree. Unfortunately, we do have some new regrowth, so that's an area where I feel like the invasives are somewhat contained, but we're going back and spot treating very selectively, so it's not going to interfere with anything that I put into those areas. So number two solution is basically what plants do you choose for your restoration efforts? And I've had an extensive growing background, but not a very extensive background in wetland restoration. So this was a challenge for me in particular, trying to come up with a list. It did start with a lot of surveys in the site to determine what species were found there, and we also had some historical documents that helped us guide our selection, because there's a lot to choose from, I guess, and trying to narrow it down to see what I could grow and see kind of what was an appropriate fit for each site was challenging. I used an on the park for the park philosophy, so if it was growing in our area, we could collect seed from it, I could take vegetative cuttings or hardwood cuttings from it, then I felt comfortable using that. It had to meet the criteria of being native, and also a species that would grow well in water, because again, our water levels fluctuate so much that you might have planted in relatively dry ground, but then a couple months go by and you're completely submerged. So we didn't bring any foreign plant material onto the park. This was all done from existing plants. So. And I threw a couple pictures out here, and I just wanted to mention that we had, or at least it's a passion of mine to promote pollinator habitat and protection of pollinators. So one of my focuses was also on plants that were beneficial to pollinators. Not all these are superb for pollinators, but photo number, is it 1? That's obedient plant. Number 2 is buttonbush, and number 6 is swamp milkweed. You can see the European honeybee on that milkweed. Those were important to incorporate, not only because they're found naturally on the park, they're native species, but they are very beneficial pollinator plants. Okay, number 3 is, one of the challenges to growing is having a facility that you can grow in, and we're very fortunate here at the Tom Ridge Center that in our regional science Consortium research wing, we have a greenhouse and a plant lab, so that's where most of my work was done. And then this funding for the grant had afforded us an opportunity to build a facility on Presque State Park. It is located on the maintenance road, if you're familiar with our park, and it consists of a cold frame greenhouse, a storage building, and then a fenced area that has 8-foot deer fencing around it to basically be our distribution center for our restoration efforts. So everything is started here, and then when it's mature enough, it goes down onto the park, and it's a wonderful facility to have. It's also, everything except the shed is unlocked, and so I've often gone over there and had people walking around looking at the plants. We like to talk about the restoration efforts. I don't think that we're always great at doing that, but people are very interested, and they do take ownership of our park, and the more they know about what we're doing on it, I think the better they feel and are more comfortable with what new structures going up on the park. But this is my plant lab. This photo was probably taken in August or September. And basically bringing things in after doing the seed collection, I make sure that they're identified properly with the help of Dr. Whyte, and then we bag them up and put them into a cooler to stratify those. This is what our truck greenhouse looks like, and this photo was probably taken in mid to end of April. You can see the trays in there. Everything is germinated right in that greenhouse, and then when it's ready to be upsized and moved out, we put it on the park. And then this is our Ducks Unlimited growing site, is what we call it. That's the cold frame. It doesn't have its film covering on the top yet, but I threw this photo in here because Holly's interns were actually the ones that assembled it. And we had a great work crew that year. You can see it's on black landscape fabric, and you'll see more photos of it in its more complete state. But that was a good time. So anyhow. Solution number 4, the installation. That seems like it would be pretty cut and dry. The only problem is we are relying almost exclusively on volunteers to do this work. So we had to find sites that not only met all the criteria for an area that had been sprayed out a number of years, and invasive species were kind of held at bay or controlled. Also things that had I guess ecological value, and then also areas that we could drive buses up to and get vans in. We suited our volunteers up with chest waders or boots. We had carts, we had shovels, we had potted plants and trays. And so there are many, many preserving sites on the park, but not everything is going to work when you're relying on volunteers. So definitely in our phase 3, I guess, but what I call phase 2, I would like to add more sites to our list, but we also have to keep in mind that I have 5-year-old kids all the way up to adults that come in to volunteer, and we just can't put people in certain areas. It's just not possible. So this is what a typical wetland planting looks like. This was an eco-cam, and these 2 boys brought their own waders, so I was super happy to see kids that had their own chest waders. But this is at Leo's Landing. And last solution is, this is actually where Bob Whyte comes in, Dr. Whyte. He does most of the surveys. He tortured me a lot this year by taking me out to a wetland and saying, tell me every plant that you see. And yes, he's shaking his head because I just looked at him like, oh. But that was actually a really good challenge. It has definitely increased my identification, and he's made me work really hard to key things out because I don't like to do that, and I use him as my backup. So. And then as far as like a success failure thing, I always gave my plants at least 1 growing season. So they have ups and downs throughout the year. If you plant in the spring, in the summer they might look like they've died. In the fall they might still look like they're dead, but oftentimes they'll come back up the next year. So I always waited about a year to see what was coming back. And I do flag everything. Probably won't be able to see the flags in my photos, but I can go back and tell what I planted, I guess. And we do keep numbers of the and species lists of what are put in. So this is Dr. Whyte and the student, and I can't remember where this was from. This was probably our first year of working together. And so I'm going to take you through the process of growing throughout the year. We'll keep it brief, but my point is, like, a lot of work that we do here can be done at 3 seasons of the year. For example, planting with volunteers. You can do spring, summer, fall. You'll see photos of that. What is really challenging is taking the cuttings and collecting seeds. seeds. And in fact, for the next phase of this grant, I've already collected all the seeds that I will grow next year. So you have to be thinking well in advance about what you're going to be doing. Collection times are very, very specific. And for example, there's a plant I've wanted to collect for 5 years now, and I have missed it every single year. That's wild geranium. That's not for this, that's just for fun. But I don't think I'll ever collect that. So anyway, basically, for anyone that does seed collections or is interested in seed collections, my high-tech equipment are Ziploc bags and Sharpies. So that's what I take out in my backpack, bring everything back to the plant lab and unpack it, and make sure I'm getting proper identification on those, and separate all the inert material from the seeds. The photo of the cold frame, this is what it looks like in the summer and fall, and everything is in there. We do pull we separate plants based on species and then pull them when we're going to have a planting. So that this site is something you can just drive a truck right up to and load up. And again, it's a wonderful asset to us. And then just like you would cut back things in your garden in the fall, our top picture there is a group of students from Erie High School, go Royals, helping me trim things back, weed the plots, separate things, throw out anything that's dead. Bottom photo was our Ducks Unlimited group planting at the neck of the peninsula, and then this is the top landscape photo is a picture of Thompson's Circle. So that's what it looks like in the fall. You'll see a photo of Thompson's Circle in every season, just so you can check out this area. This is an area that I've worked most extensively in, so that's why there's so many pictures from that. I'm also making my own field guide for this project just because there are so many wetland plants, and it's been a real challenge for me to learn all of them. I don't know all of them, I'll never know all of them, but just to learn a lot of them. My background was in greenhouse and nursery production, and these things are not something that are commercially available. So these are all the weird things that a greenhouse would never sell. But what we want to put on the park. Winter is very busy with hardwood cuttings, and top photo is hardwood cuttings soaking in a rooting hormone. Some things get rooting hormone, some things don't. We separate everything out by species and put them into pots with the soil as potting mix. And I wanted to give a shout out to our DCNR environmental educators. I can say I want buttonbush that's shorter than 10 feet tall, that's in submerged, slightly submerged conditions, and they will know exactly where it is. So I actually couldn't do my work without them. And this is my list. We do over 1,000 hardwood cuttings every year. So this does keep me busy. This is about a 3-month process. And a lot of it has to do with weather. I don't go out in extremely bad conditions, but there's a lot of nice days in the winter when we can get out. And I'm always looking to expand my list. So next year we'll definitely be doing more. Winter at Thompson's Circle, my friends down from the park. And then we also do a lot of education and tours, hikes, and things like that. And this is another shot of the Ducks Unlimited growing site on the park. You can see the storage shed there. That is a great way to not only involve the public, but recruit volunteers for this project. So spring, of course, you think of planting and seeding things. Middle picture is my fox sedge. I was pretty proud of that. And the other photos are common milkweed, which really isn't, I don't consider it a wetland species, but it's something that we germinate in addition to the wetland stuff. So spring, we have some herbaceous cuttings at the top, more volunteers. The notable photo is the bottom photo with all the pots. That's a photo taken behind the Tonbridge Center here, and before we had our duck site. And you can see that there are all my cuttings. They're starting to leaf out. There's green on those sticks, and we'll hold those over until the fall, until they're a little bit more established, and plant them for a fall planting. So we kind of do those a year in advance. So this is the species list that I see. Like I said, I've already collected for next year, so we've about doubled our species list, and we do over 3,000 a year. 1 minute. So better get going because we just got the summer. So summer, the large landscape photo is Thompson's Bay, or I'm sorry, Thompson's Circle again. There's me holding some Phragmites, so I think you've probably seen a lot of Phragmites. This here is a deer laying in our 8-foot deer fencing section. So she just walked right through the cold frame when I had the sidewalls up. But she actually didn't do a lot of damage, and she hung out there all summer, so whatever, as long as it didn't, she didn't eat all my plants. This photo here, I usually don't hold over hardwood cuttings for 2 years because they get really bulky, and of course the larger the plant is, the bigger the hole you have to dig to plant it. But I was just kind of comparing growth for that. I believe that's silky dogwood that I have in there. More summer wetland plantings. This was our quest with Holly's interns to find the native Phragmites, which we did, but I could not get it to germinate. So, and then we approximately put in about 4,000 plants. This is our holding site behind the Tom Ridge Center before we had our duck site on the park, and that was very cramped, to say the least. Did about 13, a little shy of 13.5 acres, and I'm going to give you just a real quick overhead view. This is Leah's Landing in the area that we planted. Let's see here, we've got the neck of the peninsula, and this again, because we had very high water levels, we were very limited in what we could plant in this area, so this is definitely an area that probably has the most potential as far as maybe doubling the acreage. And then this is our Thompson's Circle site, which kind of wrapped over to Thompson's Bay, and this again has been gone over extensively. This is our largest site and the one that we've put the most plants into. So I'm going to kind of not touch on what I've concluded, what I want to do for next year, because I've kind of mentioned that, but I do want to increase opportunities for volunteers. That's really important, and of course increase species. Thank you to, of course, Jeanette and the Regional Science Consortium, Holly and the Ph.D. at DCNR, and Dr. Whyte, who challenges me constantly, and I feel like I'm better for it in many ways, because I can start to identify all those tricky characters. So thank you very much.
That's one quick question. Has anybody has one?
Oh, yes.
Max is doing a lot more, and I know a lot less than she's saying. But you may have mentioned this, so in phase 3 here, or 2, whatever,
yeah.
You have plans to measure success. How are you going to know what's
probably just being a little bit more diligent on marking things and then going back and monitoring constantly. You know, there's not a lot of funding for monitoring, but definitely trying to do that. Because I'm at all the plantings and physically do the plantings or overseeing it, I do have it's hard to remember everything, but I can go through
propagation, and not a lot of organizations are removing invasive species, but not many are doing that next step of propagation. So they were excited to hear that we were doing it. It was successful, and we're really going to increase that portion of the project with our phase 3, phase 2 firm. All right, another portion of the project. This is Dalton. He's with the Regional Science Consortium. He's been with us several years, and he has been working on the part of the project, the monitoring part, looking at fish and amphibian surveys in these areas that have been discussed in the previous presentations. Sean?
So like Jeanette said, my name is Sean. I'm the field technician here at the Regional Science Consortium. I'm going to move away from plants a little bit within the project and talk a little bit more of the animals within the areas that have been treated. So briefly with the overview, I won't go into it too much since you've already got a pretty good understanding of what's going on with the project. It was to restore areas of coastal wetland habitat around the park, as well as improve the habitat structure, complexity, and hydraulic connectivity of these sites. So something that I think is not really talked about often with these species is if you have a native wetland filled with native wetland species, such as native cattails, they grow in less dense stands than the invasives do. So there's lots of little nooks and crannies for frogs and other amphibians to get in, for fish to go in and make nests and things like that. So when these areas are overrun by these invasives, they grow in very thick stands and they push out all of these animals because they're so close that they can't swim in there, and it effectively makes the habitat useless for them. So with this, we are monitoring the use of these treated areas for these fish and amphibians as a measure of the project's success. This is our study areas that we chose. Like Dr. Whyte mentioned in his project, we chose tried to spread them out all apart. Every one of these sites has been treated by the Ph.D. CNR for invasive species, but as well as there are also places where we were able to go in an afternoon, hit 2 or 3 sites, and not have it be a whole ordeal of lugging equipment everywhere while it's still getting a general idea of what's happening in the areas. So the amphibian monitoring portion of the project, primarily our data is collected through audio recordings. We use a device called Frog Logger. It's very similar to a trail cam, so you can go in and you can set like your times for recording and everything like that. And you go out and you literally strap it to a tree and let it sit for 3 days and it'll record at the specified periods that you've set. So for our purposes, we went out every week from beginning of May all the way until October, 3 nights a week from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m. they were recording. So you can think like that's a lot of recording every night and a lot of data that we generate. And then when we pull that data off, we have this software, SongScope. It's a free software that you can use online. It's pretty cool because it makes these sonograms that you can see here. And what's cool about these is so these are actual call signatures of different species of animals. And you can, it's cool because you can literally see the sound. And every species has a different signature that's very different. So you can see the first one there, it's an American bullfrog. But next to it's a gray tree frog. And it's, as you can see, a very different signature. So in theory, you don't even have to listen to the recording. You can go through and just look and identify a sound from the way it looks. That's kind of a weird thing to put into words. But another thing that you can do is not only can you get the species from it, but you can get a general idea of how many of that species are out there. So you can see in the second picture here, this is also a gray tree frog. But if that's an individual tree frog, there's a lot of tree frogs to make all of that. So you can get an idea that there's a healthy population. And then above it, you can actually see these are spring peepers call signature. Another cool thing about the software is that you can actually go into and gate out individual frequencies so that you're not listening to one call over an enormous chorus of something else. In addition to that, we do some direct observation linear transects throughout some of the sites. But as you can imagine, when you're walking through a wetland and trying to look for a frog and you see it and it jumps away, trying to identify it is very challenging in that amount of time. So not necessarily a good method of figuring out what species are there, but you can definitely go through and take account and get an idea of how dense the populations are. Our fish monitoring portion, all primarily we collected our surveys through seining methods. If you're not familiar with what a seine is, it is a net that has floats on the top and weights on the bottom. It's held between two people, and there's all sorts of techniques that you can do, but you literally drag it through the water and collect the fish. I know some of our students who were here a few weeks ago, they got some experience with us seining. So go collect the fish in the net, bring them up on shore, and as you can see in the pictures here, we have our high-tech buckets that we put them in so they don't die when we inventory them, and then immediately afterwards they're released. This was done in tandem with the surveying. A lot of times we go out, place the frog loggers, and immediately go seining. And the same, we did this about twice a month from May all the way through October. And each time we went out, we hit every one of our sites every month so that we got an idea of what was happening throughout the summer at every site. So these are our sites. Some of the sites we split up into separate sub-sites just because they were so large. So for example, the Marina Lake, we have an east and a west portion of it, but you can see then how where we seine versus where we monitored. They're very close locations as they're interconnected systems. Here's some more of our locations. As you can see, Thompson's Bay we also split up again. This is the circle portion that you saw some pictures of earlier in the other presentations, and here's the bay side. As well as Graveyard Pond and Cranberry Pond were kind of interesting sites. You'll see they're only one monitoring type at each. That was just because of equipment, access, and ease. So you can see in the picture of Cranberry Pond, there's not much open water, which if you have a seine net and you're trying to collect fish, is not very effective when you're trying to drag a net through all sorts of stuff like that. So for that situation, it was only really conducted for audio recordings and transects for amphibians, whereas we had kind of the opposite issue at Graveyard Pond. There's lots of open water, plenty of space for us to go seining, but if you're familiar with that area, this area, grass right here is the canoe livery, very high traffic area, lots of people, not necessarily the best place to leave equipment unattended for several days at a time. So our highest diversity site was at Thompson's Bay. Found over 6 amphibian species, and I believe every species that we found at other locations, we found at this location as well, in addition to 15 fish species. What's interesting of note about this site is that it is the highest for both our amphibians and fish. We found the most diversity here in both categories. It is the farthest site out onto the park, so it's the most secluded. That could have some portions to do with it. But the sonogram photo I showed you earlier of the chorus of the gray frogs and the peepers was taken here. And in some of those recordings, I actually had to go in and reduce the sensitivity of our microphone because the choruses are so loud out there that you get cracking and popping in the recording. So definitely a lot of diversity out there. Some of our secondary sites, these were very close runners-up. The Presque Marina Lake, we have 4 different amphibian species and 15 fish species as well. Less amphibians, but this is more of an area where it's direct forest right up to the water's edge. Lots and lots of toads and things like that, but less in terms of frogs. But again, lots of fish species. That's a picture of a pike that we found in the marina. It's pretty cool. Leah's Landing, again, very high diversity. All the amphibian species that we found during the periods that we monitored, as well as 11 fish species. But what is of interest here is when we seine, because of the same issues that we had at Cranberry Pond, we only seine on the lake side. We don't have any data necessarily for what's in the wetlands just because it's of difficulties. But moving forward, we have some plans for that, which I'll get into later. Our lowest diversity site were the entrance wetlands at the head of the bay. We only found 4 amphibian species here and only 1 fish species, and it ended up being a round goby, which, if you're familiar, is an invasive species. But that's not necessarily because of the site itself. If you remember from Jen's presentation, that area, it's a lot of dead European alder, lots of snags, literally a nightmare trying to get through there with a net. So I have the box here, but really this whole area in the green is also just woody wetland area. That's about shin deep in water. So moving forward, we have some ideas for improvements. For the fish, we have acquired pike nets, minnow traps, and hoop nets, which will allow us to go into areas like at Leah's Landing in the head of the bay, leave those nets and get a better idea of what populations of fish are in those areas, because with our methods currently, we're not able to get a good idea of what's there. In addition to that, our amphibian sampling approach, a lot of species of amphibians, they call at different times of the year, so if you're recording from May to October, you might not necessarily get a recording of a wood frog, which can call as early as March. So going forward, we plan to put those loggers out earlier to get a better idea of what's in those areas as well. And I mentioned the difficulties that we had with the linear transects. Because of that, they kind of fell on the wayside to our audio recordings. They weren't as big of a sampling group as what we had, but I think we're going to adjust that as more of a density approach and do that more regularly moving forward. So with that, I'd like to thank our partners, Ducks Unlimited, PADCNR, Go Native Erie, California University, Dr. Whyte, from the Erie Bird Observatory, as well as our support from the Natural History Museum, Fish and Boat, and Pennsylvania Sea Grant. They helped a lot with fish identification. Yes?
Great talk, but I feel like the whole time. So you have
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I'm not in the presentation, but I can show you those. Yeah, definitely. Out of the known species of amphibians, at least that occurred in this area, it was over half the list. So I can take you back and show you individual species that we found. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
So as Dr. Whyte had mentioned during his talk, the monitoring portion of this project is always kind of hyped up in the request for proposals. We really want to see monitoring, and then in the fine print it says, however, it can only be 10% of your budget. So I think with the resources that we have and the staff that we have, we've done a tremendous amount of monitoring in spite of it all. And to continue this monitoring, and we kind of started at the beginning with the background and then went into the plants and vegetation and then into the animal species there. We are going to conclude the session with Sarah Sargent talking about she's with Erie Bird Observatory, and she's going to be talking about the invasive plant control and the impacts on marsh breeding birds.
Is this on? Is this on? I can hear myself. I'm not shy about because I know when people in the back will not hear me using microphones. Anyway. So this is a talk. Notice the last. You guys have excellent design sense. We chose the same design off PowerPoint. But I'm not a public varsity. This is actually based on a talk that I gave at a national meeting. And at that time I only had one first year's worth of data. 2007. I've now incorporated this summer data, 2018 data. So it's a little bit different from the one version that I gave before. So of course, it's fitting that the bird talk will be the culminating of the session. Because of course, I'm an ornithologist and so, but I don't think in many ways that you would be expecting birds to be trying the habitat. And so this is the question my talk really. Are the birds responding to the quality in this habitat? That's really the question that I'll be addressing. I will mention marsh birds. This is a fairly specialized set of birds that is declining all throughout America and really the world because habitat problems issues. And there have been, of course, huge losses of habitats over the last 100 years or so. And then there's also all kinds of issues with invasive plants as we're talking about today. And other sort of degradation of quality of the remaining habitats of wetlands. And for birds, there's this issue of there are a lot of standardized methods for studying bird populations, and none of them really work for marsh birds. Marsh birds are very secretive, tend to be active at night, and they're in habitats that are difficult to get walk around as we've been seeing in other talks. So understanding is really not good information on birds, and they do require specialized habitat monitoring. I will point out there is a bird over here. Anybody know what that is? It's a leaf spinner. It is one of our sort of star performers here at Presque. I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but really birds do like marsh breeding birds will like the types of habitat that we've been talking about. Diverse plants, nice mix of structure. They do. And so there's emergent plus floating plus submerged that's in there. Some of these are diving birds. They go under the water. Feed on things that are invertebrates that are on the submerged. They really like to have all of the mix of the habitat. So a big part of restoring habitat for these birds is that control of invasive plants. I'm not going to belabor this too much. You guys all know where we are. Here's the picture. This is sort of classic illustration of control. The wall of Phragmites and Sean mentioned. This is not good habitat. Some birds can use it, and they do, but many birds do not. Too close together, it changes the hydrology. It just doesn't have the right structure qualities for the breeding birds. This is just some history. Let me talk about that as well. But here's my big question. Do marsh breeding birds respond to marsh restoration, or have they here at Presque today? Our methodology is used what's called standardized North American marsh bird monitoring protocol, which is a series of playbacks calls of species that are marsh breeding birds. Select your set species based on where you are. And so in 2011, I will say the initial surveys in 2011 prior to the intensive control of prior to the helicopter application. So we do have a baseline estimate of numbers of breeding marsh birds from prior to the big control efforts. And then our next sampling was last year, 2017 and this year, 18, and we will be continuing with the phase 3, doing ongoing marsh bird monitoring, tracking changes that way. In 2011, we went to 28 points, and since then, the opening up of better access to some of the more hidden spots and difficult to access places. The wall has been broken down. We can get deeper in and visible habitat had in 2017 and 18. Back to the methodology. The idea is you go to the spring within 3 hours and 3 hours of dawn. You can just dawn. Here, 11, we did some dusk points as well. You go there and you stay at a point, and you monitor, go through, well, technology is playback through speakers. Now we use like Bluetooth speakers. And back then, in the old days, you used like CD player speakers. But what you do is it's a time interval. Starts with silence. It's called the first species. And silence after that. Second species. Call after that. Silence after that. So go through a series of I think we had eight species, depending on the year. And so basically giving a stimulus to these birds. They often respond to by calling back here when they hear the call of their species. Sounds like it's an intruder in the territory to them. But they actually also respond to other species sometimes. But it's really the best way. Primarily you see the birds moving sometimes. One second, another approaching, you actually see them sometimes. So you go out there, mostly pointed on my kayak, and it's like 6 in the morning or something. Get to survey point GPS. You turn on your MP3 player, and you wait. Then you record birds or see during that time interval. It's about 15 minutes. Starts at 5 minutes of silence. And you do that twice a season. In 2011, we sampling, and most of the points. But in 17, 18 twice. Breeding season, you have to go during the breeding season. Very end of May, beginning of July. That's when the birds are responsive to those calls. So these are all our points. And these are the place names that we used. Head of the day, landing, long pond, big pond. We've done pretty good coverage. We actually not really done marina, except for this point there. So that's our methodology. Now, what did we find? One of the species we were sampling was the American coot, and it was only found on the bed in 2011. And this is a species that I think is area sensitive, needs larger marshes. And one issue may be the high water levels that the Whyte mentioned that we've had the last 2 years. And so it's quite possible that these higher water levels made areas that were previously suitable unsuitable. And if we get the water to back down, we may get breeding again of that species. I don't know. Pipe-billed grebe is another one that, and you'll see this for a lot of them, the best kind of remnant habitat for these birds prior to a lot of the control work was right at that head of the bay area. And those points have the highest diversity of breeding birds, at least in 2011. This is another species. We did not get any of them during the breeding season this year, 2018, and we just had one last year at Leah's Landing. In 2011, there were definitely probably 2 pairs there. Virginia rail. Interestingly enough, we didn't have any last year. This is the smallest of the species. Well, this and the Sora, they're 2 very small rails, and they have short legs, this guy does. And when we didn't get any last year, I thought, well, gee, maybe it's the high water is a problem for them, or their wetland habitat that's shallow enough for them, or mud flatty enough for them. It's just too woody, but it's like the wetlands have been retreating into the wood line, tree lines. And but this year we got 2, so I don't know. So much for that theory. I don't know. But they're a cool little bird, and honestly, I would expect more of them to be here than that. Sora is the other little tiny rail. It's got slightly longer legs than the Virginia Reel. But again, it's, there's not very many here at Presque, but there have been in all of the sampling years, we've had one anyway. So they're here, just in small numbers. So the last two species I'm going to talk about are common gallinule and then least spinner. Common gallinule is a larger bird, almost chicken-like, and there have been more of them. This is definitely one that I would say has responded positively to the change in wetland quality here. Back in 2011, that was another species that really was only down here, and in those cattail islands, and at Leo's Landing, this cattail island here. But after the control efforts have been really taking hold in the lagoons and up here in Niagara Pond, we're now getting them out in the main body of the marshes up in the main part of Presque. So that is definitely, I would call that a positive response to wetland restoration or marsh restoration. Then the other one that's really crazy is the least bitter, and this is one that was here. You can see that in 2011, there was definitely, again, back in this part of the head of the bay, it was definitely using those habitats at that time. And there were a few up here, and but not that many. And it has definitely been responding quite positively, I think, to the marsh restoration work. In 2017, we estimated a total of about 52 individuals, but I'll say that many of those, last year we did a lot of extra survey work because of the Game Commission and needing to go in prior to the spray herbicide teams to assess whether there were birds there or not. And in many cases we did find birds. So we were doing extra work above and beyond the regular survey effort. So we did have found a lot of birds, but 23 of our estimated individuals were found outside of the normal protocol, standard protocol. This year, Holly was able to avoid doing quite as much of the re-herbicide protocol, so we didn't get out there as many times looking for the birds right ahead of the spray team. So we didn't get as many of them. I think this was like 29 last year, this is 26 this year, so kind of comparable really if you looked at just the numbers found during the actual survey protocol. Oh, okay, 5, not during. We also, because you can see them sometimes if you're canoeing from one point to another, so it's not during your 15-minute timed interval, but you see them. So yeah, we had some that were outside the protocol. But nonetheless, there's really a lot of habitat now where that they're using that I think they were not using before. And I do believe that probably is in response to the marsh restoration efforts. I will say in 2017, we had quite a few along Long Pond, and this is an area that had a lot of narrowleaf cattail, which then got sprayed in 2017. And so in 2018, it was no longer good habitat for them. These guys actually kind of like the narrowleaf cattail. And so I think that we lost a bunch of habitat for them through the control effort to take care of the narrowleaf cattail along that region there. Okay, yeah, so this is a picture from there, and this is similar to ones other people have shown already today. And this is a bunch of, there's old dead phragmites back there, but then there's dead narrowly cattailed with the succession, with going back in to get the cattail. So, summary of results. We had more species in 2011, but again, they were using the habitat at the head of the bay primarily. We only had 4 species in each of the last 2 years. Common gallinules or leaf spinner were the 3 species that we saw during all of our sampling years. Virginia rail and American coot were missing last year. High-billed grebe and American coot were missing this year. Although we surveyed for king rail and American bittern, and back in 2011 we also included black rail, we wanted to make the protocol a little shorter this time in 17-18, so we dropped out the black rail. We really didn't think we were going to get them. So we have not been surveying for them in 17-18. But we continue to include king rail and American bittern, thinking that, you know, maybe we're getting enough habitat back for those guys, but no luck yet. So it'd be nice to be able to get those species here. Common gallinule, as I mentioned, really did increase between the early pre-controlled surveys and at least last year, and now it's comparable. It was a little lower this year, but anyway, I forgot to include that number on here. Leaf spinner was by far the most abundant species of the marsh birds that we're surveying for, and it really has increased quite a bit between the pre-controlled surveys till now. Last year we had more detections, but part of that was because of the extra survey work we did. Back to this picture. It's such a, and so this is now what Thompson Circle looks like, as Jen was saying. And this actually is really good habitat for wetland birds because it's patchy, has diverse structure. This is actually, we had one sighting during spring migration of a leaf spinner out here, this patch it is one of the new points we added, but we did not add any breeding birds in there this season. But we'll see what happens next. So conclusion, definitely I would say the leaf spinner and common gallinules are increasing. Presumably, we infer that that's a result of the better quality habitat available. The smaller rails seem to be rare or absent, or we're not taking them up for some reason. We have not been able to get the American bitterns or king rails yet, hopefully, fingers crossed. They are here during migration, we believe, but well, certainly the American bitterns are, but they're moving further north, apparently. Coot was present in 2011, but not as a breeder, anyway, in 2017 or 18. High-billed grebe was present previous years, but not this year. So those are all my results. Acknowledgements. I have to say, I did not go out and kayak at Dalton every day. Chris Lumberg did, and he's been really good. He's got excellent hearing ability and identifies any little squeak out of one of these birds, and he knows what it is, and really useful. And Baylog did the surveys back in 2011. I think I did go out on a couple of those. But thanks to all the partners in Presque Park, then the financial support came. The initial survey work back in 2011 was actually under a grant from the Wild Resource Conservation Fund in Pennsylvania, and then more recently it's part of the Great Lakes work. Thanks. Any questions? Issy.
When you did the surveys for the leaf spinner, were they just auditory or were they visual? Or did you actually see the birds?
Yeah, both. Usually you hear them first, and then sometimes you see them. Sometimes you will just see them without hearing them, but more often than not, you're hearing them. And they do have there's a pretty distinctive call that is done during the breeding season, this coo-coo-coo call kind of thing that is definitely identifiable. And they will do that in response to the playback.
Have you considered using any automatic recorders like these little frogs, or is that useful at all?
Yeah, actually there are people who've been sort of using, starting to pioneer or use deploying microphones and recording devices, essentially passive listening devices. And they're kind of expensive, but I've definitely thought that that would be a better way to get more sampling. And because the birds do call on their own. I mean, you'd have all this frog noise background, right? Sorry, but it would be kind of interfering. But yeah, there are people who have used it. I haven't really looked into it. I still think having a skilled observer out there is a very effective way to pick it up.
Did you know, were you aware of the marsh bird monitoring that was going on through the Long Point Bird Observatory back 20 years ago? I don't know if that data would be interesting to you. Chuck Derringer used to do that.
Yeah, I didn't check, yeah.
So,
wait, what were they doing then?
So they had a marsh monitoring program. It used to be called, I guess it was they changed the name of it. It's Long Point Bird Observatory now, I think.
Right, yep.
Around the Great Lakes, they had monitoring stations for frogs and marsh birds.
Right.
And so Chuck and I were doing basically the same thing that you guys were doing.
Right. Yeah. I think that I have heard of that. I don't know who was coordinating it or managing it, or whether it's still going. I don't know.
Yeah, I saw maybe some early data.
Yeah, they were probably using a different iteration of the type of protocol, but the current protocol has been in use for about 10 years now, I think. But yeah, be interesting. Any other questions?
Okay, well, that concludes our first session. We do have a break. We will start promptly at 11:20, so if you can be back in here prior to that to get your seat and situated. The next session I'm excited about. It's a different area of science. It's the forensic science researchers faculty over at Mercyhurst University, and one of them is working in our labs right now, Randy Depp, so I'm excited for the next session. Just quick housekeeping, if you need to use the restroom, there are restrooms.